The evening shadows stretched long across the polished floors of Hamilton Music Academy as Elena moved quietly through the empty hallways. The cleaning cart squeaked softly as she pushed it, the sound echoing in the grand space that still seemed to hum with the day's music. She paused by a practice room, her hand resting on the doorframe as she gazed at the beautiful grand piano inside. Sometimes, in these quiet moments, she allowed herself to remember. Elena wasn't always a cleaner. The hands that now scrubbed toilets and polished wooden floors once danced across violin strings, creating music that made people close their eyes and forget their troubles. But that was many years ago, in a different country, before life took unexpected turns. "Finishing up soon, Elena?" The night guard's voice startled her from her thoughts. "Yes, Mr. Patel. Just 2 more rooms," she replied with a quick smile, pushing her cart forward. At 42, Elena's face showed the gentle lines of hard work and worry, but her eyes still held a spark that even years of struggle couldn't dim. Her dark hair was neatly tied back in a practical bun, and her uniform, though worn, was always clean and pressed. She took pride in doing things properly, even if it was just cleaning. As she dusted the portraits of famous musicians lining the hallway, she found herself pausing before one that showed a young woman with a violin. The woman's expression was intense, passionate, lost in the music she was creating. Elena's fingers twitched at her side, muscle memory from another life. "Mama." The voice of her 16-year-old daughter brought a genuine smile to Elena's tired face as she finally pushed open the door to their small apartment 3 hours later. Nadia rushed forward, her school books spread across their tiny kitchen table. "I got an A on my math test." "That's wonderful, sunshine." Elena hugged her daughter, breathing in the scent of the drugstore shampoo they shared. Nadia was the reason for everything. Every early morning, every late night, every ache in her back. The girl was smart, much smarter than Elena had been at her age. She deserved chances Elena never had. Their apartment was tiny but clean. 2 rooms in total, a main room that served as kitchen, dining room, and living room, and a small bedroom they shared. The furniture was mismatched, collected piece by piece from thrift stores and sidewalk giveaways, but Elena had worked hard to make it feel like home. Bright curtains she'd sewn herself hung in the windows, and potted plants brought life to the windowsills. "I made dinner," Nadia said proudly, showing her mother a pot of soup simmering on their small stove. "Mrs. Huang from downstairs gave me some vegetables from her garden." "You're a good girl," Elena said, washing her hands at the sink. Her fingers were red and rough from cleaning chemicals, so different from how they once looked. After dinner, while Nadia did her homework, Elena sat by the single window, looking out at the city lights. From their apartment, they could just see the spire of the music academy in the distance, lit up against the night sky. In the quiet, Elena allowed herself to remember the feel of a violin beneath her chin, the weight of the bow in her fingers, the surge of emotion as music poured from her soul. She had been good once, very good. Back in her home country, people had said she was destined for greatness. But then came political unrest, family tragedy, and the desperate need to leave everything behind. America had been a dream of safety and opportunity. The reality had been harder: language barriers, unrecognized credentials, and the need to take any job to survive. "Mama, what are you thinking about?" Nadia asked, looking up from her textbook. Elena smiled. "Nothing important," she lied gently. She never told Nadia about the music. What was the point of sharing dreams that had died long ago? "Just resting my eyes before I fold the laundry." But as she rose to get the basket of clean clothes, her fingers unconsciously moved in the air, playing an invisible melody from a concerto she had once known by heart. Some things, it seemed, the body never forgot. What Elena didn't know, as she folded their clothes with practical efficiency, was that her quiet life was about to change. The music she had buried deep inside was waiting to be rediscovered, and the holds she cleaned every night would soon witness her transformation from shadow to spotlight. Elena was mopping the marble floors of the Academy's main hallway when she overheard the excited chatter. The annual Hamilton Charity Gala was coming up in 2 weeks. Every year, it was the same: wealthy people in expensive clothes, drinking champagne and congratulating themselves on their generosity. And every year, Elena and the other cleaning staff worked double shifts to make everything spotless before and after. "We need to finalize the program today," said Mrs. Wellington, the academy director's wife. Elena kept her head down as the woman's heels clicked past, followed by her usual group of friends. Mrs. Wellington was tall and thin, with perfect blonde hair that never moved, even when she laughed. And she laughed often, usually at things that weren't funny. Elena had learned to become invisible when the rich folks were around. She continued mopping, moving backwards toward the supply closet, hoping to finish before the meeting in the nearby conference room ended. "I heard one of the violin soloists cancelled," one of the women was saying as they passed. "What will we do for the intermission performance?" "Such a headache," Mrs. Wellington sighed dramatically. "The gala is our biggest fundraiser of the year. Everything must be perfect." Elena didn't mean to look up, but something in Mrs. Wellington's tone made her glance their way. That was her mistake. Their eyes met, and something changed in Mrs. Wellington's face. A slow, calculating smile spread across her perfectly lipsticked mouth. "You," she said, pointing a manicured finger at Elena. "You work here, don't you?" Elena nodded, her hands tightening on the mop handle. "Yes, ma'am. 5 years now." "I've seen you lingering by the practice rooms," Mrs. Wellington said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you like music?" Elena felt heat rising to her cheeks. She hadn't realized anyone had noticed her stolen moments, listening outside the doors. "Everyone likes music, ma'am." Mrs. Wellington turned to her friends with an exaggerated wink. "I think I've found our solution, ladies." She turned back to Elena. "The cleaning staff is always lurking in the shadows at our events. Why not bring one into the spotlight for a change?" Elena's stomach tightened. She didn't like where this was going. "Have you ever held a violin, cleaner?" Mrs. Wellington asked, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. Elena hesitated. Should she lie? Tell the truth? Before she could decide, Mrs. Wellington clapped her hands together. "Wonderful. You'll play during intermission at the gala. It'll be such a unique addition to our program." The women behind her giggled, covering their mouths with jeweled hands. "But I didn't say," Elena started. Now, don't be modest," Mrs. Wellington cut her off. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of our prestigious event. Most people would be grateful." Elena felt trapped. The last thing she wanted was to stand on stage while rich people laughed at her. But she also knew that refusing Mrs. Wellington could put her job at risk. The academy director always sided with his wife. "Thank you for the opportunity," Elena said quietly, lowering her eyes. "Perfect. You'll play something simple, of course. Maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." More laughter from the group. "Report to the music department tomorrow. They'll find some beginner piece for you and an old violin you can borrow." As they walked away, Elena heard one of the women whisper, "Veronica, that's deliciously wicked. Poor thing probably can't tell a violin from a viola." "That's exactly the point," Mrs. Wellington replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "The donors love novelty. Can you imagine? A cleaning woman pretending to be a musician. They'll talk about it for months." Elena stood frozen, the mop forgotten in her hands, as their laughter echoed down the hallway. Anger, shame, and something else, something that felt strangely like determination, swirled inside her chest. That night, as she rode the bus home, Elena's mind raced. Mrs. Wellington wanted to make a joke of her. She wanted the fancy audience to laugh at the simple cleaning woman trying to play a sophisticated instrument. Little did they know that Elena hadn't always been a cleaning woman. Little did they know what music had once meant to her. As the bus rumbled through the darkened streets, Elena made a decision. If they wanted her to play at their fancy gala, she would play. But not the way they expected. The music department was nearly empty when Elena slipped inside the next evening. She had finished her cleaning rounds early, rushing through the bathrooms and hallways with unusual speed. Her heart pounded as she glanced over her shoulder, afraid someone might catch her. The storage room was tucked away at the end of a dimly lit corridor. Elena had cleaned it many times and knew exactly where they kept the older instruments, the ones rarely used, collecting dust in the corner. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the key in the lock, using the master key all cleaning staff carried. Inside, violin cases were stacked neatly on metal shelves. Elena's fingers hovered over them before selecting one that looked particularly forgotten. The case was scratched and faded, the leather peeling at the corners. Inside, the violin wasn't fancy, not like the expensive ones the students played, but it would do. Elena closed the storage room door behind her and carried the violin to a small practice room in the basement. These rooms were rarely used because students preferred the newer ones upstairs with better lighting and acoustics. She flicked on the light and locked the door. For a long moment, she just stood there, holding the violin and bow, afraid to even try. It had been 15 years since she'd last played. What if she couldn't remember anything? What if her fingers refused to cooperate? "You're being silly," she whispered to herself. "Just try." Elena positioned the violin under her chin. It felt both strange and familiar, like meeting an old friend who had changed over the years. She drew the bow across the strings, wincing at the harsh sound it made. The violin needed tuning. Slowly, carefully, she adjusted each string, listening intently until the notes rang true. Then she tried again, playing a simple scale. Her fingers felt stiff and clumsy on the fingerboard, nothing like the nimble digits that had once danced across the strings with ease. An hour passed, then two. Elena lost track of time as she worked through basic exercises, her muscle memory gradually returning. By the time she glanced at her watch, it was nearly midnight. She had to get home to Nadia. Every night that week, Elena returned to the practice room. She started with simple pieces, gradually working her way toward more difficult ones. Her fingers developed blisters that burst and then hardened into calluses. Her neck and shoulder ached from holding the violin. But each day, the music flowed more easily. On the third night, she brought sheet music for Paganini's Caprice No. 24, one of the most difficult violin pieces ever written. It was madness to think she could play it after so many years away from the instrument. But this piece had once been her specialty, the crowning achievement of her musical education back home. Just try, she told herself again, one section at a time. At home, Nadia noticed the changes in her mother. Elena came home later, moved more stiffly, and seemed lost in thought during dinner. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" Nadia asked one evening as they ate their simple meal of rice and beans. "You look tired." Elena smiled, flexing her sore fingers under the table. "I'm fine, sunshine. Just busy at work." "Your hands," Nadia said suddenly, reaching across the table to grab her mother's wrist. "What happened to your fingers?" Elena hadn't realized how obvious the calluses had become. Nadia turned her mother's hand over, examining the hardened skin on her fingertips. "These look like—" Nadia's eyes widened. "Are you playing an instrument?" The question hung in the air between them. Elena had never told her daughter about her past as a violinist. What was the point of sharing dreams that had died? But now, looking at Nadia's curious face, Elena felt a sudden urge to share that part of herself. "I used to play the violin," she admitted. "Before you were born, back in our country. I was quite good." "And you're playing again?" Nadia asked, her eyes lighting up. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elena sighed, then told her daughter about Mrs. Wellington, the charity gala, and the obvious setup for humiliation. Instead of the sympathy Elena expected, Nadia's face broke into a broad grin. "Mom, this is perfect. You can show them all up. They think you're just a cleaner, but you'll blow their minds." "It's not that simple," Elena protested. "I haven't played in 15 years. My fingers are slow and—" "But you're practicing, right? That's why you're coming home late." Elena nodded. "Then do it," Nadia said firmly. "Show them who you really are." The night of the gala arrived with a light snow falling over the city. Elena stood in the cramped bathroom of their apartment, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She barely recognized herself in the simple black dress borrowed from Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor. The dress was a bit loose around the shoulders, but fell nicely to just below her knees. It wasn't fancy like what the guests would wear, but it was dignified. "You look beautiful, Mom," Nadia said from the doorway, holding a small makeup bag she had gotten for her birthday last year. "Let me help you." Elena sat on the edge of the bathtub while her daughter applied a touch of blush to her pale cheeks and a bit of her precious mascara to her lashes. They had never been a family that dressed up. There had never been a reason to. "Aren't you nervous?" Nadia asked, stepping back to examine her work. Elena's stomach was in knots. "Terrified," she admitted. In 2 weeks of secret practice, she had improved dramatically, but she would be playing for some of the wealthiest, most cultured people in the city. People who attended concerts regularly and knew good music from bad. Remember what you told me about the competition you won back home? Nadia said, putting away her makeup. You said you were so scared you thought you might faint, but then you just played. Elena smiled, remembering. I closed my eyes and imagined I was alone in my room. Do that tonight, Nadia said. Forget about those stuck-up people. Play for yourself. Play for me. Elena hugged her daughter tightly. When did you get so wise? The Hamilton Music Academy looked transformed when Elena arrived. The everyday building she cleaned was now aglow with hundreds of tiny lights. Red carpets had been rolled out at the entrance, and well-dressed couples streamed inside, the women in glittering gowns, the men in crisp tuxedos. Elena slipped in through the side entrance, clutching her borrowed violin case. Backstage was chaos. Musicians tuning instruments, stagehands moving equipment, performers doing last-minute checks of their appearance. Nobody paid attention to Elena as she found a quiet corner to wait. She could hear the murmur of the crowd growing louder as the concert hall filled. Through a crack in the curtain, she spotted Mrs. Wellington in the front row, wearing a sparkling blue dress that probably cost more than Elena earned in 3 months. She was chatting animatedly with the people around her, occasionally glancing toward the stage with a smirk. A young man with a clipboard approached Elena. Are you the intermission act? He asked distractedly, not really looking at her. Yes, Elena said quietly. You'll go on after the first half ends. Wait here until I come get you. He hurried away without another word. The first half of the concert was a blur to Elena. She sat on her hard chair, violin case on her lap, running through the piece in her mind. Her hands were cold despite the stuffiness backstage. She rubbed them together, trying to warm her fingers. Too soon, the applause for the final piece of the first half thundered through the hall. The clipboard man reappeared at Elena's side. You're up next, he said. Follow me. As Elena walked toward the stage, she heard Mrs. Wellington's voice rise above the chatter of the intermission crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, a special treat. Before we continue with our program, we have a unique performance. One of our own cleaning staff has volunteered to entertain us. Laughter rippled through the audience. Elena's steps faltered. She assures us she can play the violin, Mrs. Wellington continued, her voice dripping with amusement. Let's welcome. Elena, is it? Our very own Cinderella with a violin instead of a glass slipper. More laughter, louder this time. Elena's cheeks burned with humiliation. She wanted to turn around, run back through the side exit, and never return. But then she thought of Nadia's face, bright with pride and faith in her mother. The clipboard man gave her a gentle push. That's your cue, he whispered. With legs like lead, Elena stepped onto the gleaming stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded her, but not before she saw hundreds of curious faces turn toward her, some smiling in anticipation of the coming entertainment, a cleaning lady making a fool of herself for their amusement. She opened the violin case, removed the instrument, and faced the audience. Her heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Elena stood frozen under the harsh spotlight. Hundreds of eyes watched her, some curious, others clearly amused. In the front row, Mrs. Wellington whispered something to her husband, and several people nearby chuckled. The violin felt heavy in Elena's hands. A strange thing happened then. As Elena raised the violin to her chin, the world around her seemed to slow down. She noticed the instrument wasn't her borrowed practice violin. This one was different, beautiful, with a rich amber color and fine craftsmanship. Someone had mistakenly given her one of the Academy's valuable performance instruments. For a split second, panic flashed through her. But then she felt the familiar weight of it against her collarbone, and something settled inside her. This violin deserved to sing. Elena closed her eyes. She thought of Nadia's words, "Play for yourself, play for me." She thought of her old teacher back home who had once told her, "When you play with your heart, people can't help but listen." Her bow hovered over the strings. The audience waited, some already smirking in anticipation of her failure. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. A few people in the front row exchanged glances, surprised that she could play at all. Mrs. Wellington's smile faltered slightly. Then Elena's fingers found their rhythm. The memory in her muscles awakened fully, and suddenly the music flowed from her like water breaking through a dam. The challenging runs of Paganini's Caprice No. 24 filled the concert hall, each note precise and passionate. The smiles froze on the audience's faces. This was not the simple tune they had expected from a cleaning lady. This was virtuoso playing, the kind that took years of training and natural talent. Elena kept her eyes closed, lost in the music. Her body swayed slightly as her bow danced across the strings, drawing out sounds of such emotional depth that the air in the room seemed to vibrate with them. Her fingers flew over the fingerboard, executing the difficult arpeggios and double stops that made this piece famously challenging even for professional violinists. In the third row, an older man with white hair leaned forward in his seat, his eyes wide with recognition. He had heard this piece played many times, but rarely with such fire and precision. Beside him, a young music student whispered, "Who is she really?" In those moments on stage, Elena was no longer a cleaner, no longer a struggling single mother, no longer an immigrant who had left her dreams behind. She was pure music, the artist she had always been beneath the layers of hard work and disappointment. Halfway through the piece, she opened her eyes, her confidence growing with each passage. The audience sat in stunned silence. Mrs. Wellington's face had drained of color. Where she had expected to find amusement at Elena's expense, she now saw only shocked admiration on the faces around her. As Elena approached the most difficult section of the piece, her bow moved so quickly it almost blurred. The notes tumbled over each other in perfect succession, building to a climax that seemed impossible for a single instrument to create. Her fingers, calloused from years of cleaning and 2 weeks of intense practice, remembered every position, every shift, every subtle pressure needed to make the violin sing its highest praise. A woman in an expensive red dress in the second row wiped a tear from her eye. Next to her, a man who had been checking his phone when Elena walked on stage now stared at her, his device forgotten in his lap. Even the stagehands and other musicians had stopped their work backstage to listen, peering from the wings with expressions of disbelief. In the front row, the Academy's director leaned toward his wife. "Did you know?" he whispered urgently. "Did you know she could play like this?" Mrs. Wellington shook her head slowly, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide her shock. "It's impossible," she murmured. "She's just a cleaner." But the evidence was before them all. Elena, the woman who mopped their floors and cleaned their bathrooms, played with the skill and passion of a concert violinist. Her simple black dress and lack of jewelry didn't matter now. On that stage, transformed by music, she outshone everyone in the room. As she approached the final moments of the piece, Elena felt a surge of joy unlike anything she had experienced in years. This wasn't about proving Mrs. Wellington wrong or impressing the wealthy audience. This was about reclaiming a part of herself she had thought was lost forever. The final notes rang out, clear and triumphant, echoing through the perfect acoustics of the hall. Then silence. For 3 heartbeats, the concert hall remained completely silent. Elena lowered her violin slowly, suddenly aware again of the hundreds of people watching her. Had she made a mistake? Had she embarrassed herself after all? Then it happened. A single person in the back stood up, clapping loudly. Another joined, then another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, applause thundering through the hall. Some people were shouting "Bravo!" Others were shaking their heads in disbelief, smiles of wonder on their faces. Elena stood still, overwhelmed by the response. This wasn't polite applause. This was genuine amazement, the kind usually reserved for famous soloists at the end of difficult concertos. She managed a small bow, clutching the violin tightly. As she turned to leave the stage, the Academy's director himself rushed forward, blocking her exit. His face was flushed with excitement. "That was extraordinary," he said, taking her hand and shaking it vigorously. "Absolutely extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" Behind him, Mrs. Wellington approached slowly, her expression unreadable. The audience was still applauding, many people craning their necks to see what was happening. "I studied at the National Conservatory back in my country," Elena said quietly, "before I came to America." The director's eyebrows shot up. "The National Conservatory. But that's one of the finest music schools in Eastern Europe. Why are you working as?" He caught himself, glancing awkwardly at his wife. Mrs. Wellington stepped forward, her perfect smile back in place, though it didn't reach her eyes. "What a delightful surprise," she said smoothly. "If we had known about your background, we would never have asked you to perform as a novelty." She emphasized the last word, making it clear that had been her intention all along. Elena met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes people see only what they expect to see, Mrs. Wellington." The awkward moment was interrupted by an older man pushing his way onto the stage. His white hair was wild around his face, and his eyes shone with excitement. "I remember you," he exclaimed, grasping Elena's free hand. "Budapest International Competition, 2005. You won the silver medal. Your batch was unforgettable." Elena stared at him in shock. "Professor Lai? You were one of the judges." "And now I teach here," he said, beaming. "I thought you looked familiar when I passed you in the hallways, but I never imagined." He turned to the director. This woman was one of the most promising young violinists of her generation. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people pulled out their phones. Elena spotted flashes as some took pictures or videos. Near the back of the hall, standing by the entrance, she saw a familiar figure, Nadia, her face glowing with pride. Her daughter must have spent her savings on a ticket to witness this moment. "Why did you stop playing?" the director asked Elena, genuine curiosity in his voice. The simple question brought back a flood of memories: the political unrest in her homeland, her family's desperate flight, the struggle to survive in a new country with a child to raise. "Life happened," she said simply. More people were gathering around now, wealthy patrons, other musicians, board members. Someone pressed a glass of champagne into her hand. Another asked if she would teach their daughter. The questions came from all directions. "Where have you been hiding? Do you still perform? Would you consider playing at our charity event next month?" In the midst of the crowd, Elena felt strangely calm. She spotted Mrs. Wellington slipping away, no longer the center of attention at her own gala. A young woman who had performed earlier in the evening approached, her eyes wide with admiration. "That Paganini is one of the most difficult pieces in the violin repertoire. I've been working on it for years and still can't play it like you did." Elena smiled, remembering the hours she had spent practicing in that basement room, her fingers bleeding and sore. "It's like riding a bicycle," she said. "Your body remembers." Professor Lai was still beside her, now talking excitedly about opportunities at the academy. "We need more teachers in the community outreach program. People with your talent," and he hesitated, "your understanding of different life experiences." Elena glanced again at Nadia, who had pushed her way closer and was watching from the edge of the crowd, her eyes shining with tears of joy. This night had changed everything, not because Elena had impressed these wealthy people, but because she had reclaimed a part of herself she had buried long ago. As she stood surrounded by admirers, still holding the violin that had been her voice tonight, Elena realized she was no longer invisible. 1 year later, Elena stood in the wings of the same concert hall, but everything else had changed. The cleaning uniform was gone, replaced by a simple but elegant black dress that actually belonged to her. The borrowed violin had been returned, and in its place was an instrument on loan from the academy, not as fine as the one she had played that fateful night, but beautiful nonetheless. 5 minutes, Ms. Novak, the stage manager said with a respectful nod. Elena smiled, still not entirely used to being addressed this way. For so long, she had been the cleaner or simply invisible. Now, her name appeared on concert programs and flyers posted around the city. Elena Novak, from hidden talent to musical revelation. Someone had recorded her performance at the gala on a phone. The video, titled "Cleaning Lady Stuns Elite Music Academy," had spread across the internet within days. Millions of people around the world had watched as the simple woman in a borrowed dress left an audience of wealthy patrons speechless with her playing. The attention had been overwhelming at first. News reporters wanted interviews. Music lovers sent messages of support. Record companies made offers. For a woman who had spent years trying not to be noticed, suddenly being seen by everyone was difficult. But good things had come from it too. The academy had offered her a teaching position in their community outreach program, working with children who couldn't afford private lessons. Professor Lai had become her mentor again, helping her recover the technique she had once mastered. And most importantly, Nadia had received a full scholarship to the academy's high school program, her own musical talents now being nurtured. They had moved out of their tiny apartment into a modest two-bedroom place closer to the academy. It wasn't fancy, but it had good light for practicing and enough space for two musicians to live comfortably. "Mom," Nadia appeared beside her, carrying a bouquet of daisies. "These are from my friends. We're all sitting in the third row." Elena hugged her daughter tightly. "Are you nervous for me?" Nadia laughed. "No way. You're going to be amazing. Just like you were when you played for us at school last month." That had been another wonderful change, being invited to perform at Nadia's school, watching her daughter's friends realize that the quiet girl who rarely talked about her family had a mother with extraordinary talents. The stage manager reappeared. "It's time, Ms. Novak." Elena took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The applause that greeted her was warm and expectant. This was a paying audience, people who had bought tickets specifically to hear her play. She still couldn't quite believe it. As she prepared to begin her first piece, Elena scanned the crowd. In the front row sat Professor Lai, beaming with pride. Near the back, she spotted the familiar faces of her former cleaning colleagues, all given free tickets for this special night. And there, somewhat hidden in the shadows of a side box, sat Mrs. Wellington, her expression hard to read. Elena had not spoken to the woman since the night of the gala. There had been no apology for the attempted humiliation, no acknowledgement of the prejudice that had led her to assume a cleaner could not be a musician. But in a strange way, Elena was grateful. Without that cruel invitation, she might never have found her way back to music. She raised her bow and began to play. The piece was Bach this time, not Paganini, something more soulful, more reflective of the journey that had brought her to this moment. As the music filled the hall, Elena felt complete in a way she hadn't for many years. After the performance, during the reception that followed, a young girl approached her shyly, clutching a violin case. "Ms. Novak, my mom cleans offices at night, just like you used to. She saved up for 3 months to buy me this violin from a pawn shop." The girl looked down at her worn shoes. "Everyone at school says people like us don't become musicians, but my mom showed me your video and said I should talk to you." Elena knelt down to the girl's level. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl whispered. "Lily, can I tell you a secret?" Elena said, taking the girl's small hand in hers. "The music is already inside you. It's just waiting for a chance to come out." The girl's eyes widened. "Do you really think I could play like you someday?" "I think you'll play like yourself," Elena said. "And that's even better." Later that night, as Elena and Nadia walked home under the stars, their daughter asked, "Are you happy, Mom, with how everything turned out?" Elena thought about the question carefully. The past year had brought changes she could never have imagined. But the greatest change had been inside herself, rediscovering the artist she had always been beneath the layers of struggle and sacrifice. "Yes," she said simply, "I found my voice again, and now I can help others find theirs."